Welcome to Bee Gees and Me, I'm David Fedor. Today we have a very special unboxing episode for you today. We're taking a look at Higher Than a Mountain, the songs of Andy Gibb. It's a tribute album put out by Curry Cuts. It's a record label based out of Portland, Oregon that specializes in indie pop tribute compilations. This is their latest one. I'm excited to take a look at the actual physical CD. I've been listening to it online, through their Bandcamp page and on Spotify, but clearly, you see, I'm a collector. I need the physical copies of things. So I like supporting them, and I like having this in my collection. After we take a look at this CD, I'm going to be talking with Andrew from Curry Cuts about how this whole CD tribute compilation came together. So stick around for that interview, but first, let's take a look at the actual CD. Higher Than a Mountain, the songs of Andy Gibb. We have a little bit of glare because of the lighting and the plastic. So let's just rip right into this sucker and open this up first. There we go. Alright, Higher Than a Mountain, the songs of Andy Gibb. On the back, we have the track listing. Love is Thicker Than Water, Shadow Dancing, I Can't Help It, Our Love, Don't Throw It Away, Me Without You, After Dark, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, Time is Time, Desire, Words and Music, and Everlasting Love, Wherever You Are, Why, Flowing Rivers, and One More Look at the Night. So there is your track listing, and there are your artists. We'll talk with Andrew a little bit more about them in our video to come. Let me take a look and open this up. And we see the silhouette of Andy here. And my reflection off of here. This is a nice gloss packaging here. And let's get this bad boy out. So we have Andrew Curry, the executive producer of this compilation and of course of Curry Cuts, giving his introduction. And then we have the liner notes with the credits for the songs as well. So there you have it, Higher Than a Mountain, the songs of the Brothers Gibb, the physical album that's going to go there on my shelf of other Bee Gees CDs, Andy Gibb CDs, and other compilation albums and tribute albums. But first, we're going to talk with Andrew Curry from Curry Cuts right now. Andrew Curry, welcome to Bee Gees and Me.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we just got done taking a look at the unboxing of your physical album. You were the executive producer. You put together this tribute album for Andy Gibb, Higher Than a Mountain, on your Curry Cuts label. You have this small record label in Portland, Oregon, dedicated to tribute compilation albums honoring all these musical acts. Tell me a little bit about your company first, and then we'll get into Andy Gibb in terms of what brought you this project.
Sure. I about 9 years ago now, that's sort of difficult to believe, but about 9 years ago, I realized I had befriended a bunch of musicians that I liked on Facebook. And I had started a page on Facebook devoted to those sort of AM radio favorites of the late 70s, bands like Ambrosia and Little River Band and things like that. I called it the Monsters of Light Rock. And so I thought it would be fun to have some of these musicians that I was friends with on Facebook maybe do their own versions of the songs so that I would have content for my Facebook page. I mean, once you post all the songs, that's sort of it. And so I thought, well, that'd be sort of fun. So I communicated with a bunch of musicians who turned out were willing to do it. Well, about the second or third one who did it, I thought, what would be even cooler than this is if I could get them to actually record these versions, and maybe we could put a record out with new versions of all these old songs. And I was stunned when I was successful in convincing, a couple dozen musicians to actually record versions of these songs. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had to Google all this stuff. Someone said, well, I get to keep my masters. And I thought, well, yes, you will, as I'm Googling what masters are and things like that. So
and then once you found out, you're like, no, wait, no,
yeah,
no, you don't,
yeah.
no.
Remember
What
I
did
said
I
you can
agree
keep
to?
those? No, you cannot keep those. But it really was, I mean, learning on the fly. I was friendly enough with a couple of people who have worked in this industry that they were willing to, take an hour or two out of their day to write up some things that I might need to know about, or to have a phone call with me to let me know things that are pitfalls or obstacles that I might try to avoid. But, I did not come into this with any sort of knowledge. It was a complete learning on the fly sort of thing. Um, and it was a lot of fun, getting it out there, getting some people to listen, getting some people to hear these things. And so I thought, well, gee, that was sort of cool. I can do this now. And I had a taste for it. And so I decided then and there to see if I could do it again. And it so happens Andy Gibb is now my fifth tribute. And the sort of driving force has always been to get folks to either hear for the first time or re-listen to songs that maybe aren't critically beloved, maybe aren't even played that much on the radio anymore, but I think that are worthy of rediscovery. If you go through my list of records that I've put out, they're all sort of a insight into my childhood. These are the songs that I was listening to growing up. And, it's always been fun either exposing or re-exposing folks to music that they may not have thought about in a while.
That's really cool because obviously the show that I do, Bee Gees and Me, is a passion project from something
Absolutely.
that I love.
Yeah.
So you're doing the same sort of thing where um, it's all based in your love of a certain thing. And
Absolutely.
taking a look at some of the other ones, you have the light rock one that you were talking about, the
Right.
Second British Invasion, Songs of Bond, one that's called Crayons and Angels. I can't wait to take a look and see what's on that.
That is actually my only foray into a single artist and original music. My friend Brandon
Oh,
Schott
okay,
and I put that record together. Yeah, that's my
cool,
one all original record.
neat.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I could definitely tell from this that it's a labor of love, and what you just said about exposing other people to music that they might not have heard before, that speaks volumes to me, because that was one of the driving forces behind what I'm doing, because I'm a fan of the Bee Gees' later catalog. And I
Sure.
talk about this way too much on my podcast, and I'm sure my listeners are like, yeah, we get it, Dave, you like the 90s Bee Gees, but they're so like iconic with the 70s, and then before that the second stuff you think of is their 60s stuff,
Right.
that their 80s and 90s early 2000s catalog gets overlooked in everything, in biographies, in documentaries and things like that. So when I was first starting out, I was always giving my friends tribute, or not tributes, but compilations that I would make myself,
Right.
and try to get them to listen to this later stuff. So I applaud your efforts in doing the same with Andy songs.
Right.
Now, you said this started young, and in the liner notes and in some of the notes that you sent me beforehand, you mentioned that when you were a kid, you were so enthralled with Andy Gibb that you wanted to be Andy Gibb. You wanted people to call you Andy. Uh, Tell me about your obsession, if I could use that word. Um, Tell me about your passion about Andy Gibb.
Sure. Well, the fact of the matter is, I probably knew of Andy Gibb's music. It may have even been before I knew the Bee Gees. I turned 7 in the summer of 1977. That gives you some sense of where I'm coming from with all this. And my brothers and I would go visit my grandparents during the summer in Greenville, South Carolina. Now, as you might be shocked to learn, there's not a million things for kids to do in Greenville, South Carolina in the summer. But one of the things we did do, and we did it regularly, almost every day we were there, was we would go play miniature golf. And in that summer, the miniature golf place would blare the top 40, and we'd be there 7, 8 hours a day. I mean, seriously, we just sort of set up camp and be playing putt-putt all day. And when they're blaring the top 40, at least in the late 70s, you might hear the big hits of the day twice an hour. I mean, they weren't saving it. They weren't playing it every 3 hours so that you had to huddle around waiting for the song to come back on. They'd play it, and then you'd have a chance to go get a bite to eat and come back, and it'd be playing again. And so that summer, I specifically remember hearing I Just Want to Be Your Everything, I don't know, 10, 12 times a day. And when you're 7 years old, that sticks with you. And this is before Saturday Night Fever. This is before sort of the mass takeover of the Bee Gees on the charts in the later part of the 70s. And so I was just enthralled. I thought, well, this is the catchiest song I've ever heard. And I luckily I get to hear it over and over again. And that started my Gibb affections. Saturday Night Fever was a movie I was too young to go see. But the music, of course, I mean, here I am telling you this, the music was ubiquitous. There was no escaping it at the time. And I loved it. I mean, that grew on me. I'm not sure as a 7-year-old, I had any real sense that Andy's songs were being written for him by his brothers or with his brothers. But I knew that music hit me in a level that, it was the first time I remember being aware of who the artist was doing the singing. Before that, it's just whatever's on the radio, whatever your brothers are listening to, your older brothers. But for me, Andy Gibb was the first time that I really had an investment in not just the songs, but the singer himself. And it just sort of went from there.
So it's another thing that popped out at me, what you were talking about just now, that I could relate to as well, is the fact that you heard probably Andy before his brothers. I'm pretty sure, if I think about it, if I had to put a timeline on it, I probably heard and knew of Andy Gibb before I knew who the Bee Gees were. Now I turned, I was born in 78.
Okay.
So in the 80s, like the time that you're describing, I experienced in the 80s. So I probably remember Andy firsthand before I knew the Bee Gees firsthand.
Yeah.
But the Bee Gees were already in pop culture
Sure.
to the point where, like, growing up in the 80s, you knew who Michael Jackson was, you knew who Madonna was, you knew who the Bee Gees were, you knew who Elvis was, the Beatles. They were just always there.
That's right.
Like I discovered the Bee Gees music in Short Circuit, the movie Short Circuit.
Oh, sure.
Or the movie Airplane.
Yeah.
When they were doing the spoof. Like, I knew that before I saw Saturday Night Fever.
Right.
But Andy Gibb specifically, I remember him on Punky Brewster.
Absolutely.
And Punky and Cherry, her best friend. Every time I think of him, my heart does a break dance. So kind of like you, at that age, he became Andy Gibb, and it was more than just the music. Like, I knew who he was because of his appearance on Punky Brewster.
Sure.
So that was fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's I mean, a little bit later in the chronology, but about the same way I did it, which is to say that, the Bee Gees, I'm sure as a little kid, I knew Jive Talking and You Should Be Dancing, which were hits before Andy sort of came on the scene. But in terms of associating singer and song as one entity, I'm sure that I knew Andy before I was fully cognizant of the Bee Gees.
And I think that speaks volumes to, like, a lot of people now think, oh, why was he never in the Bee Gees?
Right.
Because he was playing to a completely different audience that the Bee Gees were at the time.
Right.
And it made no sense, because why have two streams of revenue or two streams of entertainment when you combine that and, I think I just want to have one. It's like, no, he is a monster machine himself. Now, unfortunately, he passed away way too young, and way too young.
Yeah.
And the chances are he would have joined. There were talks of him joining and things in the late 80s. But that was also something that I was unaware of as a kid. I was 10 at the time when he passed away. I didn't get to experience that. You probably remember that moment. Was that something? Do you remember any rumblings of him joining his brothers, or do you remember when he passed away and things like that?
I certainly remember when he passed away. I certainly remember that. And I remember, at that point, I was probably 17 or 18 when he died. And probably a little too cool for Andy Gibb at that point in my life, probably trying to transition into music that I thought was cooler or made me more, exotic.
Right.
But I remember distinctly when he died, I remember being saddened about it. But it's in terms of the possibility of his joining the Bee Gees, I didn't hear about that contemporaneously at all. That was years later when I heard that was even a rumor. And then, the documentaries that have come out and I've gotten a few books about the Bee Gees have sort of mentioned it almost in passing. And so I don't know how serious the conversations were, but,
I don't think, even the brothers themselves in interviews have said contrary things
right.
when asked about it. So I don't think it ever got to the point. Like I saw somebody said something like, oh, he was writing songs with, they were planning this album for blah, blah, blah. And I was like, they've gone on record saying that it was never close. It was
right.
thought about. Two brothers were right. Yeah, I don't think we were as close.
Right. And that's always the sense that I got, that it had been maybe kicked around, but I don't know how imminent it was at the time of his death.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a tantalizing prospect. I mean, it certainly was something that would have been fun to see. Who knows if it would have worked or if it would have, made each of them seem a little bit odd. But it was a fun thing to consider.
Yeah, at the time, especially in America, Bee Gees were not in any kind of pop area.
Right.
They were still, suffering the disco backlash and things like that. So, and then Andy was doing, Solid Gold and doing like Broadway type stuff and things like that. So he hadn't put out any, new records in a while either. So, it could have been maybe a career resurgence for both of them at the same time. But again, there's a lot of what ifs that are fascinating in the Bee Gees and the Gibb timeline. So that's probably one of the major ones.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Let's play a little what if. It'll be real quick. Like I said before, like we chatted a little bit before, and I was like, I have no format. I don't have any question answer. I kind of just come up with stuff as we're having this conversation, and this idea of what ifs come into play. Are you familiar with the movie Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band?
Oh, most certainly. I saw that in the theater.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah.
I had the chance on my channel to talk with Diane Steinberg Lewis, who played Lucy from the movie. She was amazing, fabulous, wonderful woman, and so within the past month leading up to talking with her, I watched the movie 3 times. I was listening to the music again and blah blah blah, and I was like getting heavily into that movie again. And one of the things that I always found fascinating and thought, what if instead of Peter Frampton getting the lead, what if Andy Gibb played the lead in Sgt. Pepper's?
Wow. Yeah. That would have been something.
Because
he was as big as Peter Frampton was at that point.
Yeah. Peter Frampton had his big live album, and he was, kind of trying to be pigeonholed into that. But I don't think he was the right fit for that campy movie.
Right.
I think Andy Gibb with his brothers as his band. Oh my God. Like that would have just, the movie still probably would have been as welcomed in history as that one did. Luckily now it's kind of mellowed out. There have been enough worse movies made since then that people don't crap all over that movie as much as they did back then.
Well, I bet who would be intrigued by that what if is Peter Frampton himself. I bet he'd be like, sure.
How do I do it? How do I do it?
Let's hop in the time machine and make that happen. But that would be that would be that'd be something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun. All right, let's get to your compilation now. There are so I need to say that I just opened this today
Yeah.
for the video, but I had been listening to it online for months. It
Yeah.
is a great collection, well done, very good job of
Oh,
putting this
thank you.
together.
Yeah.
Um, the thing that struck me about it was the deeper cuts, like we talked about earlier. He, obviously Andy is well known for some of his bigger hits, and it's even said in the liner notes and some of the reviews that are about this album, was like, are there enough songs to put on
Right.
a tribute album?
Right.
And you think of his greatest hits albums and the ones you have from here, the deep cuts from here. He had a large enough catalog for this without question,
Yeah.
and some of these songs have a rebirth to them because they got remade.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about putting this album together with those things in mind?
Sure. Well, some of the previous compilations I had done were genre tributes. That is, I did one to light rock and I did one to the Second British Invasion. And, you can find 50, 100 songs to choose from and sort of put them together. With Andy, it was my first tribute to a single artist. I had done a tribute to Paul Williams, the songwriter, but his songs were made hits by, a variety of different musicians. But Andy's was the first one that I've done that was one artist and his entire body of work. Um, I knew that he had big recognizable hits, but I knew that, if you focus on those 8 or 9 songs, that might not make an entire tribute.
Right.
And so what I did was went back and listened to all the old Andy songs that weren't the top 40 hits. And some of them, I hadn't heard in probably 30 years. Some of them I was more familiar with just because he's someone I like to play when I'm, hanging out or just chilling at home. Um,
Sure.
and so, it became pretty easy finding 15 songs that I thought would make up a well rounded compilation. I wanted to make sure that I got songs that were not just written by Barry or the Bee Gees. I wanted to make sure that some of Andy's songwriting was included in there. And as I put this together, I thought, well, gee, this song that's a deep cut probably could have been a hit if they had decided to push it to radio or try and make it into something. I think that's testament to Barry and his production team, and that he, this was not just. I think a lot of artists like Andy who had big hits are known as singles artists,
Mhm.
but his albums really had 3 or 4 deep cuts on there that are absolutely worth going back and listening to. I think it's a mistake to reduce him to his number one hits. And so that was all part of the calculus of putting it all together. I thought, here's a guy who's a part of the Gibb legacy. I mean, and often overlooked, maybe dismissed as a teen idol or which he was. I mean, he was in Tiger
Sure.
Beat and on girls' posters on their bedroom walls. But I thought he had enough material there that it was worth digging into a little deeper.
I I agree wholeheartedly, because I would consider myself guilty of dismissing Andy and his work like you described.
Yeah,
I'm a Bee Gees fan, tremendous, obviously, duh.
sure.
Like, look at the room I'm sitting in.
Yeah.
But for the 25 plus years that I've been collecting Bee Gees things, I've had literally one Andy Gibb album,
Right.
and that was the greatest hits collection on
Sure.
CD.
Sure.
Just because it was like, oh, all right, this is my Andy Gibb contribution.
Right.
Um, and I don't. And I think it was because, and not that I didn't like Andy Gibb, but to me, like the Bee Gees, their harmony, the songs, their 50-year career, that's what appealed to me.
Yeah.
Andy was always, I guess, like you described, the little brother, and I'm
Right.
sure that had to tear at him and have some sort of complex about, being the little brother of the Bee Gees, and I don't want to think of him like that or describe him like that.
Yeah.
But that is part of his complicated legacy.
Absolutely.
So
It,
this compilation helped me listen to more of that.
yeah. Yeah.
So, like, I think that's a testament to what you set out for in the first place. Me, as one of the biggest Bee Gees fans, that I know. I don't know
Yeah.
how to describe that. 25 plus years, and I hadn't really given Andy Gibb a fair shot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm as close to the target audience that should be giving him a shot. So
Sure.
so I think that's neat. I keep saying the word neat because I use the word cool too much. So cool.
But
Uh,
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think there are probably a fair number of Bee Gees fans who feel that way. And after my childhood affection for Andy sort of transitioned into my 80s MTV days and
mhm.
big poofy hair and all that went along with that. Um, it was easier to return to the Bee Gees than it was to Andy. Andy did sort of feel like he was of a time and had a little 3-year run and maybe had been preserved in amber in 1978. Um, and this got to some of that. I mean, this project, which was started, I don't know, 3 or 4 months before COVID really hit, and so as a result, I couldn't get all the musicians to meet the original deadlines just because the world sort of stopped.
Right.
And so because this project took a little longer than others that I've put together, I had a lot of time to explore the subject matter. And so a lot of research went into this, a lot of time and energy, not necessarily so that the record would reflect all that, but just my own interest in rediscovering somebody that I was so excited to listen to when I was a little kid. It was a, I'll say it just because you said it, it was a neat way to open up a chapter that I think not enough people pay much attention to anymore.
Yeah. Um, Two songs I want to talk about just quickly
Yeah,
before I ask you about some of the artists on the compilation.
for sure.
The song "Wherever You Are" by Irene Pena.
Yeah,
That's one of the deep cuts that I had not been that familiar with. I had
sure.
heard it, but
Yeah,
that's, um, and I really like that version. But the
yeah,
one song on here that I am obsessed with and I can't stop listening to
yeah,
is "Why"
yeah.
by the Test Pressings.
Isn't that great?
It is such or I don't want to say a recreation because it's the very opposite of a recreation. It
Right,
is
right.
a reinterpretation
Yeah,
of the original song. And I don't know, my webcam probably can't pick it up, but I just got goosebumps thinking of how
yeah.
much I like this song.
Isn't it good?
Dare I say, Andrew, that I like the Test Pressings version of "Why"
Yeah.
more than the original.
Well, I'll tell you this: when it came in, when the test pressing submitted the song, I legitimately had to go re-listen to Andy's version to make sure that it was even the same song. I mean, I was just like, "Wow, this is a rock song." Yeah, all right. And then I was
Yeah,
like, "Yeah, I don't remember the Andy version being like this." I mean, of course,
it's not.
I knew that it wasn't, but yeah, it's but yeah,
But
I mean, they when I put these things together, I'm always steadfast in telling musicians, I have nothing to, if you want to do it as death metal,
Mhm.
do it. Um, obviously I want the I want the songs to work as a full piece, but I am
Sure.
insistent that I do not interpret the songs for the musicians. They have carte blanche to do how they want to do this. The Test Pressings are a band that I have worked with in the past. They're led by Robbie Rist, which may not be a name that everyone knows immediately, but Robbie Rist was a child actor. He was on the Brady Bunch and did a little run on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and he did the voice during of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Doc McStuffins, and he's a prominent guy. He still has a nice career as an actor, but is also a very talented musician. And he's the one I went to on this. And he
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
I just pulled him up, and like I had no idea. He's the front man of the Test Pressings.
That's right. He's one of the singers. There are two singers on that track. There's a female singer and Robbie. And yeah, Robbie Rist, cousin
Wow.
Oliver from the Brady Bunch.
Yeah. Of course, I grew up watching Brady Bunch and
there he
remember
is.
Cousin Oliver. Everybody,
Sure.
refers to those last years as And I was a big Cindy Brady fan. I loved the lisp and the pigtails, and
No.
that was and once they started growing older, they had to introduce
That's
cuter,
right.
younger
Bring
kids.
the
They brought
young cute kid in. They brought in Robbie.
yeah,
And he's
no kidding.
got a great sense of humor about those days, and he's still in touch with a lot of the actors who were in the Brady Bunch. But he is also a musician of some renown, and so it's been great fun. When I first contacted him, I was like you. I was like, "This is Cousin Oliver. I'm talking to one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles." But he is funny and raucous, and he's got a podcast that I've been on talking about this record as well, and he's great. And so I knew when I assigned him this song, I knew it wasn't a hit. His theory has always been, when he's done records of mine, give me the song that no one else chooses, because that's the song I know I can turn into something, whatever I want it to be. So I think if I had offered him Shadow Dancing or I Just Want to Be Your Everything, he would have said, I think I'd rather have, one of these lesser known songs. And he turned it into, to me, it sounds like almost Cheap Trick or something. I mean, it's a full on rock and roll song, which the original, if people go back and listen to it, it certainly isn't in its original iteration.
Right. Yeah, without a doubt. That was my favorite reinterpretation of it.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned Turtles, I just pulled him up, and he's Michelangelo from the original Turtles movie from 92, or was it 91?
Somewhere in there.
So congratulations on blowing my mind right now. The fact that this song that I love so much was...
That's right, Cousin Oliver.
Originally, done by a Gibb, which was reinterpreted by a Ninja Turtle, and oh my gosh! All right,
I'm sure if Robbie watches this, he'll think, "Oh, thank you for thank you for turning me into Cousin Oliver again," which was 50 years ago. But yeah, he's great, and I love working with him.
Yeah, I mean, I respect the fact that he's gone on to do such great stuff since then, because that just is another testament to his creativity and his talents. The fact that I don't know. It blew my mind. Okay,
no, I took pleasure in blowing your mind.
All right, awesome. Let's go. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other artists, or let's actually, before we get into the artists, let's talk about what you describe, or what's described on the liner notes here, as indie pop.
Sure.
It's not disco representations. It's
right.
more of a modern style, and what is known here as indie pop. Tell me a little bit about that.
It's some of these musicians might comfortably be categorized as power pop. It's not necessarily the stuff you're hearing on the radio these days. It's not Max Martin. It's not, those sorts of artists. But it's folks who have sort of devoted their musical careers to doing very melodic, guitar based pop music, rock and roll pop music, where the melody is sort of central to their original material. And so these are folks who, love a good harmony, who play their Rickenbackers, who are, Beatles fans.
Yeah.
I guess a lot of straight lines can be drawn to the Beatles from uh, musical trees. And these folks that I have worked with and are friends with, these are people who have been influenced by that, and early Bee Gees. There are big Bee Gees fans on this record as well. So indie pop is just sort of a catch-all to say these are not people who are playing heavy metal. They're not playing a lot of synth-based pop stuff that you might hear on the radio. That these are very specifically a callback to a style of music that was probably at its peak in popularity in the mid to late 60s, but that sort of had a rebirth in the late 70s and the early 80s with bands like, say, the Knack or other similar bands. And so I think a lot of the bands that I listen to and that I work with come from that tradition, a tradition of melody and harmony and guitars and bass and drums, sort of
Yeah.
the eternal, what you think of as the rock and roll setup.
I think you're speaking and you're hitting the words that Bee Gees fans love,
Yeah,
because the Bee Gees are all about melody. They're all about
right.
harmony.
Yeah,
It's all about that type of style of music. And some compilations have wildly different interpretations of Bee Gees songs in there.
yeah,
I personally love hearing things like that. It might not be particularly my style, but I don't I don't instantly hate it because it's different.
right.
So I think that the traditional Bee Gees fan um, would gravitate to this compilation
Yeah,
because it is a very it's spiritually connected, musically spiritually connected, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Whereas some other ones, now I have a couple other favorite compilations that have these wildly different. There's a I forget what they call themselves. It's not death metal, it's like glitter metal or something like
Right.
that. They're called Tragedy.
Tragedy. Sure.
I freaking love those guys. They have some
That's sort of
of
like
the
glam metal.
craziest
Yeah.
glam rock, yeah. Um, and but this is not like that. Like
No.
I know some Bee Gees fans don't dig the tragedy
Right.
interpretations and things.
Right.
This stuff can be played next to the originals, and you could feel the same way.
Yeah.
You mentioned that some of these artists were Bee Gees fans. Can you tell me a little bit about ones that specifically had any kind of fun stories of working on this album?
Sure. Well, Coque Belda, who is originally from Spain, and he does a version of Me Without You, which was Andy's last top 40 hit in the United States. It only got to number 40, but it's a lovely big ballad. Coque has done two Bee Gees tribute albums himself. Well, there you go.
What, these ones that I happen to
Yeah.
have sitting
That
right here
I
next to me?
Well, the funny thing is, those two records were almost the reason I didn't ask him to be on this record. I thought, well,
Oh, no kidding.
he's going to be gibbed out. I don't know if he wants to pigeonhole himself as just doing Gibb covers, but he was up for
Yeah.
it, man. And I specifically gave him a song that none of the Bee Gees had written. Andy wrote that one. And so it was, maybe a little bit of a different approach for him. But yeah, he's a big. I mean, obviously, he's put out two
Right, right.
tributes. So
Well,
I
I've Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry to cut you off, but
No, no,
I've
no.
messaged him and spoken with him over
Yeah.
Messenger before as well, because I discovered him through Bandcamp, which may or may not have been while I was looking at your stuff. So
Right.
I can't remember if
Yeah.
I found him because of yours or if I found him while I was on Bandcamp and it was like suggested and things
Right.
like that. But some of his covers for the Bee Gees side
Yeah.
of on this are tremendous.
Yeah. He's great.
He
He's great.
and he does some deep cuts on his covers as
That's
well
true. That's
that
right.
don't get covered. And one of the ones that is more popular, it's called "You Win Again," but it's in their
Sure.
later era. He
Yeah.
has this what's the one instrument that is like sounds like doorbells?
Oh,
Xylophone,
yeah.
maybe?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Wow. See, I'm trying to have a serious conversation about music, and I couldn't think of the word xylophone. Um, so yeah, so he has just if you're listening to this, if this hasn't been cut out of this, check out Coke Belda's "You Win Again" cover and all of his
Yeah.
other covers. They're
Yeah.
awesome.
No, he's
Um,
great. And so the interesting thing about putting all these records together is that if you meet Koke, you will be one step ahead of me. I've never met him in person. There are a lot of these people I've never
oh,
met in person that I have struck up virtual friendships with. And
right.
so my dealings with him are all through emails and Facebook messages and Twitter. Um, but yeah, he's as nice a guy as there is. So I hope you
That's really
can
cool.
put something together.
Yeah, that it would be a unique challenge putting together this compilation during a pandemic, or at least finishing it during a
Yeah.
pandemic. But the beauty of being online and having the ability to have everybody submit things virtually had to make it a little bit easier.
To your point, if it were not for the internet, I don't know how people did things like this before they were able to. There was Dropbox or file sharing and things like that.
Yeah,
The notion of trying to do this without uh, the internet, I mean, it couldn't happen. And so, yeah,
right. It
that
would
changed my
literally have to
music
be.
experience.
Yeah, it would have to be big record label that has
Yeah,
facilities, that has a
right,
roster of people contracted to them.
right.
And okay, you have this studio time, go in there and make me a record. This
Yeah,
is more, a passion project where people get to kind of work on their own
yeah.
and contribute towards. And I think that comes across in a way because this does feel like a more personal
I hope
project.
so. I hope so. When I did my tribute to Paul Williams, I spoke with a good friend of his about putting it together, and he said, "Well, you need to get in touch with Lady Gaga and Paul McCartney." And I thought, I don't know what you think I have in my Rolodex, but I don't think Paul McCartney's going to take my calls asking him to do Rainbow Connection. And so I appreciated that he was shooting for the stars, but these things are meant to be um, a little lower key than that. They're
Right.
meant to be more personal and more intimate. Not to say that I wouldn't gladly work with Paul McCartney and Lady Gaga if they wanted to be on my next record. But
Well,
that is,
they're not going to hear you here, pal. They're
yeah.
not going to hear you here on this. Sorry for the disappointment, but keep putting it
Well,
out.
that's
Somebody
right.
will
That's
hear
right.
it.
That's right. Visualize.
That's right.
But but no, I mean, but again, that was never the aspiration getting into this. I've worked with some
Right.
folks who've had some uh, stuff on the radio, who've had some hits, who've been on, Conan O'Brien. But this is not about trying to get all the biggest names that I can get. This is about getting the people that I enjoy working with and whose original music I want. That I love. So when I'm putting this together, the hope is sort of twofold: that I can get folks who like Andy Gibb to maybe listen to Coke Belda for the first time, but I can also get people who like Coke Belda to listen to Andy Gibb for the first time. So
Right.
that's always how I've thought of this. It's never meant to be get the biggest stars that I can get. It's always meant to be get the best musicians that I dig the most.
That's cool. That is really cool. Tell me about the Higher Than a Mountain as the name of the project, and Love is Thicker Than Water as being the first song off the bat, right out of the gate at track number one.
That was a big number one hit. Obviously, I tend to name my compilations either after lyrics or things that catch me. Higher Than a Mountain, just that phrase always stuck with me. Um, I, I'll be truthful. I had that idea in mind for 6 months. That was always the working title of the record. And when I first publicized it, I'm working on this project, Higher Than a Mountain. A few people came out of the woodwork and said, that's insensitive to the drug issues that Andy dealt with in his life. And
Ah,
I will be truthful. It never occurred to me. And so
I
I
I'm sitting here also like, oh yeah,
right.
duh. Um,
and I responded with all sincerity saying, that was never my intent. These are not meant to be snarky or inconsiderate of anybody's addiction issues. That's just a line in that song that stuck with me. It's a good phrase, Higher Than a Mountain, and it's in the context of the song, it's talking about love. So that's what I
right.
decided to call it. But yeah, there was, surprisingly, now, when I got some pushback on the title, many more people came to my defense, saying,
Yeah.
that's overthinking things. But I hope nobody has ever heard that title and thought that it was anything other than, laudatory towards Andy.
I would agree with the people who supported you, and I agree with your assessment as well. And although I also think that a total drugged out compilation of trippy songs called Higher Than a Mountain
Yeah.
would be really cool to make as well. Um, I got a kick out of the
Higher than a
fact.
mountain of cocaine.
I got a kick out of the fact that I, for some reason, songs with parentheses in the titles
Yeah.
entertain me,
Yeah.
and
He's got a lot of
that
them.
he has a lot of them. Um, and the name of the title of your album is like sandwiched in between the love is higher than a
Right.
mountain, two parentheses, thicker than a mountain, three parentheses. Like,
Right.
there's like that to me
Yeah.
was fun. So that's the only thing I ever thought of the song title, and not any of the drug stuff. But
Yeah.
um, any other stories of any artists that you would like to speak about that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, no, I mean, these are a lot of folks that I've worked with in the past. I try and do a mixture of folks that I've worked with and new people. Um, Keith Sledadal, who does Time is Time, which is one of my very favorite later Andy hits, uh, was the lead singer of a band called the 88. And the 88 is probably best known for having done the theme song for the TV show Community. So
Yeah.
Keith's voice, if anyone ever watched the TV show Community, Keith's voice is the one that opens that show every week. And so I was a big fan of the 88, and I reached out to Keith, uh, wondering if he might be up for doing it. And again, when you're approaching someone who's had a bit of success, who's, maybe been on the charts, who's done a national tour, who are, you know, reasonable sized names, even if not everybody knows them, you're never quite sure how that's going to go. But he was just like, sure, tell me the deadline, let me know what I can do, and he dove right in. So I've generally, over the course of the 8 or 9 years I've been putting these records together, I've generally had uh, decent working relationships with everyone. I mean, there's never been someone, even some of the bigger names that I've worked with, there's never been someone that I thought, ugh, this was not worth it. Don't meet your heroes, kind of thing.
Right.
And so, it's nice uh, to get to do that with folks who are sort of like minded about what you're putting together. I mean, I think if I had to deal with people who were either thought they were better than the material or better than the other musicians who were involved, that wouldn't
Mhm.
be much fun. And so, that has helped guide these things, is the chance to work with people that I know I like their original music, but also that I like them personally.
Yeah. And I think it all comes back to you as well. I've known you for 53 minutes and 30 seconds so far,
Yeah,
but I could get the vibe off you that you're coming from a great place of putting this together. So, of
yeah.
course, you're attracting great talent who is going to work well together as well. So, that's really neat.
Well,
So,
I hope so. I mean, I think when I put the light rock tribute out all those years ago, I think there was a reasonable concern that maybe I was doing this to be snarky or to make fun of the material or to try and be
yeah.
better than it. And that's never been my intent. My intent has always been to approach this with sincerity and earnestness, but not so much sincerity and earnestness that it's overbearing or anything like that, but just showing that some of these songs that maybe have been dismissed as cheesy or corny or relics of a
Right.
past era are really solidly put together melodic songs, and that a new interpretation might open somebody's ears to something that they've been wrongfully dismissing for the last 25, 30 years. And that has sort of informed every record that I've put out. There's some great Bee Gees tributes out there, but one of the reasons I didn't want to do the Bee Gees is because always have thought that Andy was a part of their legacy that maybe didn't get the attention um, that the older brothers themselves got, which, obviously they deserve all the attention they're getting. That great documentary that came out. But I've often thought that Andy's career was too much considered a footnote to everything instead of, a very rather prominent chapter of what it is they had going on. He had multiple number one hits, multiple top 10 hits. And so to leave him out of the picture always seemed a little unfair to me. Especially since, and I talk about this a little bit in my liner notes, especially since the Bee Gees themselves were able to continue putting music out after they were effectively banned from the radio. But Andy, I mean, that was it. He was effectively told, "We don't want you anymore,"
Yeah.
and he couldn't go off and write "Islands in the Stream" or an album for Barbara Streisand. That wasn't what his gifts and talents were. And so I have often claimed that nobody suffered as a result of the backlash against the Bee Gees more than Andy Gibb. And I think uh, that, I mean, now I'm getting into armchair psychology territory, but I can't help but think that with his addiction problems, that couldn't have been helpful to his long term health.
Yeah. And hopefully with projects like yours, with the documentary that came out, with the biopic that's coming out with the
Yeah,
brothers, and
yeah.
I think Barry mentioned writing a biography that's in the works over the next couple years. Hopefully there'll be enough things where a rising tide lifts all ships type of
Yeah,
situation where
yeah.
Andy could maybe get a little bit more credit where he's due. But to let our listeners know and let our viewers know where they could find this album, because they're going to want to listen to it. They're going to want to add it to their collection of CDs and things like
A-
that.
Absolutely. If you're a physical media guy, which I am, I've always been, I wanted to buy it. Yeah, there you go. I'll hold up my copy as well.
There it is.
Um, that is available at my Bandcamp page, which is just currycuts.bandcamp.com. If you just go to Bandcamp, you can just type in Curry Cuts and they'll take you right to my page. And that's where the physical CDs are. I will be the one actually putting them in an envelope and writing your name on the address line and sending it out your way. And there are CDs available. I did not do vinyl this time. Vinyl is its own thing. But if you still like a CD, if you still like liner notes, if you still like to know who did what and played what instruments, Bandcamp is the way to go. But it's at every streaming place for folks who that's more their scene, and I know there are a lot of those folks out there. So Spotify, Apple Music, all the usual places, Amazon, it's there. So it's not hard to find, but if you want the actual physical copy, um, it's available at Bandcamp.
Which I encourage you to get, because personally, I love supporting things like this so that
Yeah.
other people make things like this. Um, and to me, there's something about actually holding a CD in your hands, an album in your hands. It makes it
Yeah.
real.
Well,
And
that's always been my thing. And as I do more of these and put out more records, I'm always concerned that, I mean, does anyone buy physical music anymore? I
yeah,
still do. I don't buy it at the level that I did when I was growing up and had a wall of CDs and albums on my shelves. But yeah, I think what you said nails it. That if you've got a favorite artist or a favorite musician out there, nothing beats cracking open that record for the first time and holding it in your hands.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Andrew, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk a little bit about Higher Than a Mountain, about the acts that are on there, and letting us know where we could listen to it. I really appreciate your time, and I had a blast.
I had a blast too. I always love talking about this stuff, and I've really enjoyed following your stuff and seeing your videos on YouTube. And so the thought
Oh,
that I
thank
got
you.
to come on and talk a little bit about the Bee Gees and Andy with you, that's I
Well,
count that as a win.
I'd love to have you back because I know my listeners and my the people who watch this will want to have this
Yeah,
on on their record shelves, and
for
they
sure.
need to listen and stream, because that's what it's all about, is about collecting and celebrating the Gibb
Yeah,
music.
I
So
think that's absolutely right. I've met a lot of Gibb fans through the course of putting this together, and I think they're gonna dig this if they get a chance to hear it.
yeah, so buy it, buy it, buy it.
That's right.
All right, Andrew, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.